A deal has been signed. After weeks of near misses, dramatic reversals, and the very real possibility of a wider regional war, the United States and Iran have reached an agreement. Pakistan's prime minister was the first to announce it to the world, and within hours, both Washington and Tehran were calling it a victory. But here's the question that matters most right now. Does this deal actually change anything on the ground in Lebanon? Because while diplomats are shaking hands and making statements, strikes are still hitting the southern suburbs of Beirut. Rockets are still crossing into northern Israel. And Benjamin Netanyahu has given no indication whatsoever that he intends to stop. So, what exactly has been agreed? Who gained leverage? Who lost it? And why should you care about a deal signed thousands of kilometers away from the streets where the real fighting is happening? To understand what this moment means, we need to go back. Not just weeks, but years. Iran's relationship with Lebanon is not new, and it is not simple. For decades, Tehran has invested heavily in Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group and political party that it helped create in the early 1980s, in the aftermath of Israel's first invasion of Lebanon. Hezbollah became Iran's most important strategic asset in the Arab world. It was Iran's forward deterrent against Israel. It was Iran's way of signaling that any attack on its territory could be answered through its allies, through the network it had built across the region. That network, which analysts often call the axis of resistance, stretches from Lebanon to Syria, from Iraq to Yemen. It has allowed Iran to project power far beyond its borders without ever having to fight a direct conventional war. Strategists call this asymmetric warfare, and for a long time, it worked. But the past year has changed the calculation dramatically. The war in Gaza that began in October 2023 pulled Hezbollah into open conflict with Israel. Hezbollah began firing rockets into northern Israel in what it called an act of solidarity with Gaza. Israel responded, and what began as a low-intensity exchange escalated into something far more serious. Then came the direct confrontations between Iran and Israel. Iran launched missile and drone attacks directly into Israeli territory. Israel struck inside Iran. The red lines that everyone had assumed would hold began to dissolve, one by one. And throughout all of this, the United States was watching, calculating, and pressuring. The administration in Washington, which returned to power earlier this year, came in with two contradictory impulses: a desire to project strength and a fear of being dragged into another Middle Eastern war. That tension has defined American policy for months, and it is the context in which this deal was eventually negotiated. Now, let us look at what is actually happening right now, because the details matter enormously. According to reports, Pakistan served as the key mediator in bringing Washington and Tehran to an agreement. That itself is significant. Pakistan, a country with its own complex relationships with both the Islamic world and the West, managed to position itself as a trusted channel between two adversaries who do not speak to each other directly. Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif announced the deal before either the Americans or Iranians did, which tells you something about how delicate the moment was and how important it was for Islamabad to claim credit. The deal, structured as a memorandum of understanding, contains several key elements. Iran has agreed to lift its closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes. The United States, in exchange, has agreed to lift its blockade of Iranian ports. Both of these were economic weapons being used in the conflict, and both were causing real pain, not just to the countries using them, but to the entire global economy. For Washington, the Strait of Hormuz issue was becoming a serious political problem. Disruptions to global oil supply translate directly into higher fuel prices for American consumers. That is not a situation any administration wants heading into a period when it needs economic stability. So, there was genuine urgency on the American side to resolve this. For Iran, the economic relief from having its ports reopened cannot be overstated. Iran's economy has been under enormous strain from years of sanctions, and the more recent military confrontations had made the situation dramatically worse. Analysts who follow Iran's internal politics closely have noted that the economic pressure was generating significant domestic frustration, even among populations that are generally supportive of the government. Then there is the element of the deal that relates to Lebanon. According to Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif, the agreement calls for the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon. Those are striking words. Immediate, permanent, all fronts. The problem is that Israel is not a party to this deal, and Israel has been conducting its own military campaign against Hezbollah based on its own security calculations, not on what Washington and Tehran agreed to. Yet just in the past week, there were two significant Israeli strikes on the southern suburbs of Beirut, the area known as Dahieh, which is Hezbollah's stronghold in the Lebanese capital. These strikes came in response to Hezbollah rockets landing in northern Israel, and according to reports, those strikes came very close to derailing the entire negotiation process. Iran reportedly came close to launching another direct missile strike on Israel in retaliation, which would have destroyed any possibility of a deal. The fact that Iran pulled back from that response, apparently to preserve the negotiation, tells us something important. Tehran made a strategic choice. The deal mattered more than the immediate retaliation. That is a significant signal about Iran's priorities right now. But the question remains, does Iran have enough influence over Hezbollah to actually enforce a ceasefire in Lebanon? And does this deal give Israel any reason to stop its offensive? This is where the analysis becomes genuinely difficult and genuinely important. Let us think about this from each actor's perspective. For Iran, this deal represents something it desperately needed, a way out of an escalating military confrontation without suffering a humiliation. Iran's military has taken real losses over the past year. Its air defense systems were exposed, its proxies have been weakened, its economy is under severe stress. A deal that allows Iran to claim it achieved a diplomatic victory while quietly stepping back from the brink is valuable. Iran's deputy foreign minister described the Memorandum of Understanding by pointing to what he called his country's military achievements. That is the language of domestic political management. It is how you sell a compromise to a population that has been told you are winning. For the United States, the deal allows the administration to claim exactly what it has already claimed, a significant agreement that will bring stability to the region. Whether or not that is true, the political messaging is clean. And, on the substance, there is one critical element that remains deeply unclear: the nuclear question. The original justification for the military pressure campaign against Iran was the Iranian nuclear program. The stated fear was that Iran was approaching, or had already reached, the capability to build a nuclear weapon. That fear, shared by Israel, was presented as the fundamental reason why military action was necessary. So, the central question any serious analyst must ask is this: what does this deal actually do about Iran's nuclear program? And here, the honest answer is that we do not yet know. There are indications based on what Iranian state media has reported that some kind of mechanism may have been established to address the nuclear issue. But the details have not been made public. The deal's formal signing has not yet taken place, and experts warn that the nuclear question is likely to be the subject of intense negotiation in the weeks and months ahead. This matters enormously, because if the deal provides only vague assurances on the nuclear question, Israel will have little reason to accept it. And Israel's cooperation, or at least its restraint, is essential to whether any of the Lebanon-related provisions of this deal can actually hold. There is another layer here that deserves attention: the Gulf Arab states. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar have been watching this crisis with a mixture of concern and quiet calculation. These countries have built their economic models on stability, on the assumption that investors, tourists, and businesses will continue to flow into the Gulf because it is a safe and predictable environment. Iranian missile capabilities pose a direct threat to that model, not necessarily because Iran would actually target Dubai or Riyadh, but because the mere possibility of such targeting creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is the enemy of investment and growth. Analysts who follow Gulf economics closely have noted that this threat has already begun to have subtle effects on how some international businesses and investors think about the region. The deal, to the extent that it reduces the immediate threat of Iranian missiles, will be welcomed quietly in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, even if none of these governments will say so loudly. Now, let us think carefully about where this is likely to go. The first scenario, the best case, is that this deal holds and gradually expands. In this scenario, the Memorandum of Understanding serves as a foundation. The formal signing takes place as planned. The economic provisions, lifting the Strait of Hormuz closure and the port blockade, begin to be implemented. Iran uses its influence over Hezbollah to push for a genuine ceasefire in Lebanon. The United States uses its leverage over Israel to encourage, or perhaps pressure, a pause in the offensive. And the nuclear negotiations, though complex, begin in earnest with a framework that provides credible verification mechanisms. This scenario is possible. It is not impossible. But it requires a remarkable alignment of interests and a degree of trust between parties who have spent years treating each other as enemies. Experts who study these processes note that memoranda of understanding are often the beginning of a negotiation, not the end of one. The hard compromises tend to come later. The second scenario, and in many analysts' assessment the most likely one, is a partial and fragile stabilization. The economic provisions of the deal are implemented because both sides need the relief they provide. The immediate danger of a direct military confrontation between the U.S. and Iran recedes, but the situation in Lebanon remains volatile. Israel continues its operations against Hezbollah, perhaps at a reduced intensity, but without a genuine ceasefire. Hezbollah continues to fire rockets, perhaps fewer of them. The nuclear question remains unresolved, subject to ongoing talks that proceed slowly and with frequent crises. In this scenario, the deal buys time. It reduces the immediate risk of catastrophic escalation, but it does not actually resolve any of the underlying conflicts. Lebanon remains a battlefield. The nuclear question remains open, and the region remains in a state of managed instability, which is, in truth, the condition it has been in for most of the past several decades. The third scenario is the one that keeps regional analysts awake at night. In this scenario, the deal collapses before it is even fully implemented. The trigger could come from almost anywhere. A particularly deadly strike in Beirut, a Hezbollah attack that kills Israeli civilians, an Iranian hardliner who decides the compromises in the deal are too great, a domestic political crisis inside Israel that pushes toward more aggressive action, or simply a miscalculation. A strike that goes wrong, a rocket that lands in the wrong place, a commander who makes a decision that neither government intended. Iran came close to launching another missile attack on Israel just last week. The only thing that stopped it, according to reports, was the desire to get this deal across the line. If the deal begins to look like it is falling apart, that restraint disappears. And if Iran launches another direct attack on Israel, the United States will face enormous pressure to respond. That is the path towards something much larger and much more dangerous than what we have seen so far. The probability of this worst case is not negligible. The process has already had, as the reporting describes it, countless false starts. There are powerful actors on all sides who have incentives to derail it. Political survival in Israel has been tied to a narrative of strength and military action. Iranian hardliners have their own constituencies to satisfy. And Hezbollah, while dependent on Iran, has its own organizational logic and its own reasons to continue fighting. What we are watching in real time is a diplomatic construction being built on uncertain ground. The foundations are real. The economic incentives for the deal to hold are genuine. The desire of ordinary people across the region for the fighting to stop is overwhelming. But the structural forces that produce this conflict have not been resolved. They have been, at best, temporarily managed. The Lebanon question is perhaps the most pointed illustration of this problem. A deal between Washington and Tehran can say whatever it wants about Lebanon, but Lebanon's fate will ultimately be determined by what happens between Israel and Hezbollah, between a state with one of the most powerful military forces in the region, and an armed group that has spent 40 years preparing for exactly this kind of war. There is a broader lesson here, one that students of geopolitics have observed repeatedly across history. When great powers reach agreements to manage their own conflicts, the smaller actors caught in between do not always benefit. Lebanon has spent decades being used as a battlefield by larger forces. Iranian money and weapons flowing in, Israeli military operations pushing back, American pressure applied selectively, and the Lebanese people bearing the cost of all of it. This deal, if it holds, may reduce the intensity of that dynamic. It will not eliminate it. What we can say with reasonable confidence is this: something significant has happened. The U.S. and Iran stepping back from direct military confrontation is genuinely important. The lifting of the Strait of Hormuz closure and the port blockade will provide real economic relief to people who badly need it. And the signal that both sides are willing to negotiate rather than escalate is meaningful, even if fragile. But the gap between a signed agreement and actual peace in Lebanon is enormous, and filling that gap will require not just diplomacy between Washington and Tehran, but a political solution to one of the most intractable conflicts in modern history. The next few days, as the formal signing approaches, will tell us a great deal about whether this process has real substance, or whether it is, as skeptics fear, another false start dressed up as a breakthrough. Watch what Israel does. Watch what Hezbollah does. Watch whether the nuclear provisions, when finally revealed, have any real substance. Those three things will determine whether the people of Lebanon see any respite at all. And that brings me to the question I want to leave with you today, because this is not an academic debate. Real lives are at stake in Beirut and in northern Israel and in cities across Iran. The question is this: is a deal between the United States and Iran ever sufficient to bring peace to a country like Lebanon when the parties actually doing the fighting were never at the table? Think about that and share your perspective in the comments, because understanding what a deal can and cannot do is one of the most important questions in international security today.